It's lawnmower season. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Next victim. Hey guys, welcome back to the next video. This is our next project. It's a Yard Machines ride lawnmower. Believe it's early 2000s. Let me check. It's got a 17 horsepower Briggs in it. Check that code. So we get an angle where it's not washed out on you. 00, so it's a 2000. The engine is. So as long as that engine's original, it's a 2000 model tractor. That's 20 years old. Doesn't look too bad for a 20-year-old tractor. Deck doesn't appear to be rotted out. I haven't done anything on this yet. I've had it since last year, sitting in the yard, ready to come in. But got a few things, a few issues. That's an issue. Let's check, see what we got for Julio. Well, it's over full. It's about a ½ inch higher on the dipstick than it should be. And it smells like gas. Gas with a G. It smells like old gas. So, what's happened here is what's very common on these. Got a fuel tank up here that is higher than the carburetor. If you look, follow that line, you see an inline filter, and the tube goes directly into the tank. There's no shut-off valve on this tractor. So what happens over time is the weight of that fuel overcomes the needle and seat, fills the carb, overfills the carb, goes directly down, fills in the engine. Either it leaks by an open valve or it leaks by the valve. Fills the piston up, the cylinder, it goes by the rings, and then it dumps into the crankcase. So the crankcase has got gas in it. Not usually a big deal. We're going to drain it, we're going to flush it, we're going to clean that out. We're going to pull the carb off, check and make sure the needle and seat are as good as they're going to get. We're going to replace that filter. We're going to install a fuel shutoff valve in here. This is a resale mower, so we're going to make sure that we're going to go over the whole thing, make sure it's good to go for the next owner. We're going to pull that rocker cover off and we're going to check and set the valves and give her a general once over. You can feel underneath there's a lot of grass and stuff stuck under that deck, but blades are out of reach. There we go. I can feel one now. I don't feel any wiggle in the blade. I've just got a hold of the blade and I'm moving it up and down, see if there's any play in the bearings. I don't feel any, but we're going to take the belt off. We're going to spin them to hear if we got any bad bearings in there. There's going to be an idler in there, a bunch of other stuff. So I think first thing is I'm going to remove that hood. Should be, relatively simple. It just lifts off. The headlights have already been removed. You just quarter turn, twist them left, and then you can lift that entire hood off. I get the hood off, put it outside, get it out of the way, give us a little more room in the shop. We're likely going to pull the top cover off. We're going to check, make sure there's no grass and everything in the cylinder head. We're going to check our coil gap to the flywheel. We're going to make sure that everything is perfect under there. I don't sell junk. I sell this stuff off my front lawn, which means I sell to neighbors, friends. So I don't want to sell junk. I sell good stuff. Make sure that everything is 100% before they take it. And I do also offer service after the sale. So if they have an issue, give me a call. We'll sort it out for you. Alright, let's get some stuff going. Get you in the stand. Get some stuff. Oh. It's got a leaky sneaker. Well, that's no good. Guess looks like we're fixing that too. All right, hang on. All right, let's get into this a little bit. First thing I noticed was this cover's loose. 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts are missing. There's 1 screw missing, 1 screw left. There's only 1 screw holding that top cover on. Let's see why. Let's see what's going on underneath there. Gotta pull this grass screen off first. That's gotta come off first. And it's a Torx, but I think it's stripped out. We'll grab a flat screwdriver. It's a Torx and a flat. So we'll grab a flat screwdriver and pull that out. Little tiny short screw. Got to remove the dipstick because it won't fit through the hole in the cover. Well, let's see. Oh, surprise! It's an inner cover. Weird. Anyways, pull the actual cover off. What do we need there? 3/8. We'll need to get a ratchet in the back. Weird. All right. Take these 2 out of the front. Yeah, like I said, this is a mystery tractor. I really have no history on it. The guy I bought it from had bought it used. I think he was going to try and make a project out of it, but he decided he doesn't like working on tractors. So, yeah, man, I got that oil cap off there now, the dipstick out of there. Man, does it ever stink like bad gas in there. Oh yeah, the crankcase got filled up with gas. There should be 1 more on the dipstick tube. Yep, there is. Let's get these out of here. Yeah, so we want to check out the fins underneath there and make sure that the cooling fins are clear, not full of grease and oil and grass, because that'll overheat the engine. And there's those. What was that? 1/4 inch? Yeah, I think that's a 1/4 inch. Let's grab a socket. This little 1/4 inch screw just secures the dipstick tube to this steel case. Should come out of there now. Oh, 1 more 1/4 inch bolt. A little plastic on the starter cover. Okay. Nice and clean. Looks all right. There's very little gap on that coil. Very, very little gap. So I'm going to sand the magnets. I'm going to regap the coil properly. I'm going to pull this big bolt out of here and I'm going to pop that flywheel to make sure that the crank key isn't sheared. Now this tractor's been sitting a while. The flywheel's very rusty. And I could also tell the pulleys on the deck are very rusty too. We should probably clean them up to help belt life. Alright. Get some tools out. Big impact gun. I don't remember what size that is. I think it's 15/16. Yep. It'll be a 1/2 inch on the 2 smaller bolts. We grab some tools and I'll turn the camera back on. Alright, let's get that stuff out of there. We'll start with these 2 little 1/2 inch bolts first on a ring. Get those out of the way. This metal ring out of here. It's going to get a little noisy here with the impacto gun. Pull the big bolt out of the center. which was not overly tight. And have a look down there with the light, see if that key is sheared. No, it's perfectly fine. So, I don't even have to pull the flywheel off. I'm not going to bother. Key looks good. Torque spec on that is actually quite tight. If you don't tighten it tight enough, it'll shear that key. That's tight. That'll work. Satisfied with that. I'm going to take the plastic cover off. It is located. There's a little pair of notches here. There's a notch here. So it does only go on one way. Pretty rusty under there. What that's going to do is going to give me access to the side of this flywheel so I can sand it. Grab some sandy paper there. Well, this will just go worn out. Sanding the magnet doesn't increase the spark. It doesn't make it better. It doesn't make it whatever. But if you sand the rust off, it'll give you a more accurate gap. The rust on the magnet doesn't make the spark weak or anything like that. Down to bare metal. There's like no gap. These are 8mm heads on these little screws in here, so I'm going to loosen them off. I'm going to use my fancy coil gapping tool, standard business card size. These are not overly tight. Pull the coil away from the flywheel. Get that card in there. Let the coil go back to its natural home. And just snug those bolts back up. Beautiful. Now there's a gap. Now there's a gap where there was none before. Oil dipstick tube just fell out. Now it's bleeding oil all over the floor. Stay. Perfect. That's good. We check the fins. They're all nice and clean. There's no oil. There's no grass built up in there. That top cover can go back on. If the engine turns out to be bad, I'm not overly concerned with it because I do have spare engines and everything. I can just drop another engine on there. Let's get this part back in there first. Line up our bump with the notch. Steel ring. Little 3/8 electric impact gun. Now I put the cover back on. Well, looks like it's fitting in there. We'll start all these bolts first. Just start them. That way we know everything fits. That's good. Let's get our little 1/4 inch screws back in there. That's good. If I put this on there and put 2 screws here, this screen fits on there and looks real nice. 8mm, 5/16, wherever I put it. There it is. Gotta find another. I'm gonna take that one out. I'll put a different screw in there, that way I can match it up. I'll put 2 screws in here that'll hold that cover down tight. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna move on to the rocker cover. We're gonna reposition the camera, and we'll get this rocker cover off and have a look at the valves. Alright, I've gone over this a few times on a few of my different videos, especially with lawn tractors. But for some people this will be the first video they watch. But what I'm gonna do is pop this valve cover off. Rocker cover. The valves are in the head. I've got a rag sitting down here just to catch any oil drips that might come out of the bottom of this. I'll just pop these cover bolts out. We've got a gasket that has been siliconed. And it's broken. So I'll probably just silicone it. We'll clean all the surfaces up and put some silicone on there. There's a lot of silicone because it's inside the engine. This engine hasn't even been cranked over in quite a long time, so there's no oil dripping out of it. Alright, so what we're going to do is you have to set the valves to the point where they're released. This one actually has pressure on it. So that's the exhaust valve, because the valve is in line with the exhaust pipe. The intake comes in here, and I can see that in this aluminum is cast a passageway going down. So that intake that's our intake. And it's loose. Quite. So by spec, you rotate it around. You know what? I should pull that plug out of there. It's got a strange looking plug in there. We're gonna pop a new one in there anyway, so let's get that out. Is it 5/8 or 3/4? It's not fitting is what it is. I think it's 5/8 anyways. Yep. Pop that plug out of there. It makes it easier for us to turn that engine over by hand. CR43 CTS. Pretty sure that belongs on a small block Chevy. CR43 TS? Yeah. I think it's a small block Chevy. The reach is wrong. These threads should be longer. This is a tapered seat, and the cylinder head has got a flat seat, so it's completely the wrong spark plug in there. In the trash it goes. That's going to get a new one. We'll take a peek down on top of the piston since it's sitting right there. It's definitely wet. Alright. So now we can turn the engine over by hand. Nice and easy. There's our exhaust valve opening. This should be completely loose. There's our intake valve opening. Then this one's tight. So our intake valve is likely too loose by going by feel, and the exhaust is too tight going by feel. So this is exhaust. Intake valve. So now the piston is going down. Now it's coming up. So I'll get a screwdriver down in there. Small screwdriver. We're going to watch the piston come up on the screwdriver here. Intake valve is closed. Piston is coming up. You can see the screwdriver handle coming out a little. And by spec, we're supposed to turn it until piston goes down a 1/4 inch after top dead center. This engine likely has a compression release device on the camshaft that bumps the valve open as it's cranking. It allows it to crank easier. So it just slightly bumps the valve to allow it to drop some compression so it cranks over easier. Once it fires up, the decompression device slides out of the way under centrifugal force, and then it just runs normal on the cam. Well, this is the point where we should have clearance in our valves. This one we got clearance, this one is too tight. Now usually your intake valve will wear looser, the exhaust valve will wear tighter as the valve seat, the valve and the valve seat start to wear together. The exhaust valve, basically the stem comes farther out, gets longer, and you lose your clearance. So it's a Torx lock with a hex adjuster. Many times it'll be a hex lock, so you got to crack the hex loose and then you adjust it from the center. This one's opposite. So grab a Torx screwdriver, and I think it's 10mm. I think it's a 10mm nut. Screwdriver we need? No. Is this one we need? It'll work. So we're at the point now where the Briggs says this is where we should time it. So we're going to crack that loose. Maybe we won't. Crack it loose. We're going to set our clearances. So now this is adjusting it, so if I loosen this nut, that was very open. Man, there was a lot of tension on that spring. The other thing I noticed is these two locks are going to be likely very close in depth. This one is far more recessed into the nut than this one was. This one was way out on the outside. That indicates to me that the outside nut was too tight. Anyways, we're getting too technical here. So, spec. On the exhaust, 5 thousandths to 7 thousandths on the exhaust. That's our range that we're trying to hit. Because the exhaust, if I have a range like that, usually what I'll try and do is on the exhaust valve, I'll adjust it on the loosest end of the spec. That way as it wears tighter, and it'll be longer before the clearance is gone. So there's our 7th thou feeler. I'm just going to snug this down with my fingers. Get a little bit of drag on there. So there's a little bit of drag at 7th thou. Now what I have to do is I have to hold this hex, try not to adjust it, and tighten that lock. I'm going to tell you already that this lock is now about the same depth as that lock. So this is where it should have been. So somebody who's been in here and misadjusted the valves. It's just a bit of a feel with it. Like it's a experienced feel on these. You don't want it tight. You want it just to feel just a drag between the rocker and the little cap on the stem. Well, this is actually where it should be. That's perfect. Moving on to the intake side. The intake spec is 3 thousandths to 5 thousandths. You will find that the intake specs are usually smaller than the exhaust. Either its intake and exhaust are the same, or the intake is smaller. Exhaust valves, the exhaust valve train gets hotter during use, and as it gets hotter it expands and it will use up its own clearance just as it's running. So that's our 5 thou feeler. It's way loose. That's the maximum side of the spec. So what I did was I set the exhaust at the maximum side of the spec. I'm going to set the intake at the tightest, at the smallest side of the spec, and that'll give us a longer time before the valve goes out of adjustment enough to cause an issue. So 3 to 5, I'm going to put my 3000 feeler blade in there. That was quite loose. I got a real good turn on that. So, now that the tension is correct, little tight. Little loose. It's right there. That's perfect. Right there. Perfect. That's it. So that exhaust valve being so tight like that is you're going to lose compression. The engine will not have the power that it needs to have. End up losing compression. Won't run right. Bad fuel economy. Not mileage, because it's not mileage. We'll have poor fuel economy. So now we're going to clean this up with a rag and some brake clean. I'm going to take this, clean this up, rag and brake clean. And I'll put a bead of silicone on there. We'll silicone it back on. Alright, so I've wiped everything down with brake clean. It's important when you're using RTV that it's clean and dry, no oil. I put a bead of silicone around this rocker cover. I'm holding the rocker cover away from the engine until I get a couple of bolts lined up in there. That way when I push it down straight on the bolts, it'll make sure that everything's aligned for us. There's 3. And 4. Now I can set that valve cover down onto the engine. There we go. Snug them all up. Well, that one fell out. That's it. Valves are set. Plug boot's a mess. I can actually see metal through it. I might have to change the plug boot. We'll see. Alright, moving on. I think what we'll do is I'll get some of the oil out of it. I'll pull the camera around the other side there and show you what I'm dealing with on that. It does have an oil drain on the side of the engine. Usually there's a little piece of pipe sticking out of there. This one's got no pipe, so it's going to drool oil everywhere. So give me a sec, I'll reposition the camera. Alright, so here's our dipstick tube right here. Comes down from the top. Right at the base of this is a square plug, square-headed plug. Most of the time there's a little pipe that sticks out just beyond the frame here with a cap on it, and that would be your oil drain. But in this instance, this steering arm is actually in the way. So what's going to happen is I'm going to pull that plug out, and then it's going to pour all over the base of the frame here. What I'm going to use is a fluid evacuator. It's got a skinny little tube. I'm going to stick it down the dipstick tube, and I'm going to suck most of the oil out first. It's just easier and cleaner for me. Not everybody has one of those, but I do, so I'm going to try to use it and go from there. I might tip the tractor over to this side, get more of the oil to come over to this side of the sump, and we'll get as much oil out of there as I can. So I get that evacuator set up, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is that fluid evacuator extractor. It's got a small little tube here. that I can stick right down the dipstick tube, right down the bottom of the sump. And I can use this machine to evacuate down. So I'm going to run this pump, and what it'll do is it'll pull this entire chamber into a vacuum, and it'll pull oil out of the engine. It's not the fastest thing, but I can see the oil coming up already. Now this is under a vacuum now, and it's going to continue, without pumping, it's going to continue to pull oil out of the engine. And I'll be able to hear it when it goes dry. It'll start gurgling in there. Yep, oil's still going in. You can actually hear it. Alright, we'll come back when it's empty. Alright, so the fluid's all evacuated. I got fresh oil in there. I spun on a new oil filter. I know I'm getting ahead of the game here, but I don't even know if it runs yet, and that's fine. Let's get into the carburetor. I'm missing a wing nut. Supposed to be a wing nut under here and another one on top. There's missing one. Air filter's a little clumpy and dirty. We'll clean that out. Get that out of the way for now. Let's pull this top off. A couple of 8mm it looks like. One here, one there. And it goes on the carb too. Okay, let's get those off. It looks like a 7/16 maybe? Ish. Let's have a peek, see? Yep. Couple of nuts here. Okay. This tube goes in the bottom of the air cleaner there as a crankcase ventilation. So we've got a governor spring that's not on there. It's supposed to be hooked up here in the same hole as the rod. And choke rod is not hooked up. Choke rod is in the wrong spot. Not in there correctly. One of these 8s. Once you get this choke rod is it's got a loop in it, and it's supposed to be, the whole thing is supposed to be through this bracket. And then when you pull the throttle up, there's a lever in behind here that comes up and pushes on this to close the choke. So somebody's had this all apart, and ain't nothing right on this one. So let's get the fuel line off of there. Come on. We're going to take this apart anyways, and we're going to change, like I said, change that filter. We're going to put a valve in line here. Got old yellow gas coming out of it. Ugh, gross. 8mm deep. Actually, maybe the shallow will work. No. 8mm deep. 5/16 for my American viewers, if I have any. Okay, so governor spring, it's actually unhooked from both ends. tip it this way to get the choke rod off. We'll tip it this way to get the governor rod off. And I probably could have unplugged the connector first. Okay, carb's off. It's goopy. It's messy. I can see junk in it. I'll get a close-up on the camera in a second. This is that rod, the choke rod I was telling you about. It's not supposed to be there. It's supposed to be completely in there. That way when this arm comes up, it pushes on it and activates the choke. And it looks like it's bent, so I'll have to fix that. This is supposed to slide in there, not on the outside. Governor spring. I can hook this side back up now, and it will stay there for us. Tiny little spring. Okay, that slides in. And when we put the carburetor back on, this, both the spring and the rod hook through the same hole in the carburetor. Alright. Reposition the camera on the bench. We'll start tearing this ugly thing down. Whoa! Easy now.